basically want to plant here first, I guess. Here, just to stabilize the soil from falling. I try to have some more grassy plants, like tape-shaped plants here. I also think it would be nice to start a bit lower, because then you can spray water directly. And we start with cryptocurene parva. If it would be here, it would close this gap a bit in a very nice way, if it would be here. So it could, even if it's here, make this, close this, and then it's also hiding this line. Even though you can't see this here, I still like to plan a layout for a photo, have it nicely planned, and I think where there is light, there should also be some plants if it fits. But we have to think about what we could plant here, and I thought about maybe getting an additional, I don't know, some cryptocurene that is not growing like super big, but maybe a bit higher. Maybe try to stay like somewhere between green and brown and not go too reddish or something. I'm using the Eriocaulan because it has wider leaves and it's also a good filler. It grows a bit taller. I think it grows from the middle, but it's like if you leave it like that, so it's not going shooters, but it's still going from here to there. And you can already see here like how it's growing and that it's also already pushing other plants to the sides. But it will not grow too far in here, I think, because it will still like the nutrition. Put one there, so we have it on both sides, so it doesn't look like it's just growing on one spot, which is also important, I think. There is exactly two plants that I really like because they don't give this extreme harsh contrast. And they serve very different purposes, I think. The Blixa, for example, is very good for nature aquariums and also for contest aquariums. I think it has different names. It's Polygonum, but it also has the name Persicaria pakchong. I think this is one of the most amazing plants together with the Blixa japonica. I keep it there yet because it's an underwater plant, and if it dries out, it's dead really quickly. But they both don't get this typical red, but they get this kind of rosé color, and I like that it's blending in with the green. So I like that somehow way more than the super crazy red tones, because you basically only have red tones like blooming flowers, which underwater doesn't make that much sense. Even though this is not a completely underwater layout, I would say, I still think that using too strong contrasts can really give a unnatural impression, and that's why I like this pictures or this plants a lot.
You don't use red plants?
I do, but I would probably, like, for example, if I do a nature aquarium but not a contest aquarium, and then as an accent, that would be nice. But if I try a contest that is leaning towards being natural somehow, more than, even though it's a nature aquarium, you just play with different things. It just makes more sense to, leave the crazy red tones a bit more for this, because then they can take over more impact. If you have heavy hardscape and then also like heavy red tones, I think it's just a bit much of everything. And one day a friend asked me like why I like aquascaping, and then I thought about it for a long time. I said it's basically a 3D puzzle, but it comes from your own imagination, and you don't use like any industrially made pieces, but you use natural pieces that you can put together. So I never get bored because of the problems that are coming up over and over again. I was discussing where these should go, and at first I thought that it would be interesting here, but somehow I said a bit earlier that I think it would be cool here, because then this gap would be closed, and it just also gives the whole scape a bit more of balance. And there will be other larger plants here somewhere, but I wanted to have this as an open space and then start the other plants here, so there's really like a tunnel at the end, which also draws the eye, the attention to that point. I put in a slate plate here to prevent the soil from going down further, and that makes the cypress not too high at the moment. It might grow much higher at the end, but I think at the moment it's pretty cool that it's not completely overgrowing everything. So the impact that it has now is pretty nice. And what's also important is I don't want this to be in front. I just want this to be visible. So I try to stay with the planting in the back corners. You can also like put some stones aside and put one maybe here if you have to put one aside. I don't know. You already did. You were so quick. I think we haven't spoken about this plant yet. This is going to be the main background plant that I'm using. Hygrophila polysperma is basically doing something that no other plant does. This somehow gives a very nice jungle feeling, and it also is pretty cool because it's kind of growing over and to the front. It is a pretty interesting plant, and I came to work with this plant because I was basically looking into very old books from ADA, and there was an old tank, I think from 86 or something. So yeah, I saw this scape from Amano that he did like very old school and classic, but somehow this scape gave me an idea on how to solve an issue that I had like quite often already, because often when you use the, let's say, Myrophyllum matogrosens, they have a very fresh green color. And even though I like fresh green a lot, I also feel like when you want to create some kind of depth and jungle feeling a bit, the green color should be like the fresh green color should be there. But if it's too much, it doesn't really give an impression of what I want to show basically. This plant, since it's growing so much to the front when you like grow it properly, it also is really good because it's kind of fast growing, but also cutting is not that difficult. Maybe you don't like when it's shooting roots on the leaves higher up, but I think it looks very natural and can even make the tank look more natural than it would when you don't have these. Also when you are in the jungle, there is lots of roots and stuff hanging around that doesn't have too much color. When there is some white roots coming from the plants, it for me gives a really natural feeling. Because if this is growing over a bit, it could potentially lead to the plants lacking a bit of light. Maybe it has to be trimmed, especially vertically from this point of view, so the overgrowth is not shadowing everything. So for maintenance later, I would try to keep that in mind. In theory, the concept itself could be in the top 100. I think it could, but it really depends. Yeah, maybe have to rescape something at one point and apply the same to this tank. I don't think that it would score very bad. Otherwise, I wouldn't have decided to scape something like this. If it's a contest scape, it should aim to look nice at the end and somehow special. And even though in a workshop you can never do the same that you do in weeks or months at home. So let's hope that the impact that we create is stable enough. I just want to glue some flame moss on 2 rocks. So basically I just picked a not too wide stone. We used that here. So that might also, like after it grew the first roots, it might also need a trimming very fast, because when the submerged growth starts, it looks very weird together. Like I just have my 120p at home at the moment is basically the whole foreground is a 12 to 15 centimeter tall Mauritania from Liliopsis Mauritania. I had to cut it down because I experienced exactly the same issue. Very necessary to cut it after a while. This details need to be fixed later. And then we can probably do the Blixer next, and then we just do the moss and the ferns. Is there anything I'm missing? I know there is the Tripartita Mini. And this one, okay, we could also use that one. That's quick. So yeah, I also think that the Blixer here, when it goes towards the focal point, could look very interesting and make a very nice extra impression that is drawing the attention a bit, and then leads to the focal point a bit more. And what I also like is putting everything in a straight line, but maybe sometimes just have a small interruption, like put 3 plants or here like a small amount and then leave some space out and then put some more in. With Blixer, it can also happen that it takes over the tank. I think even Tommy from Green Aqua, he said the Blixer was completely melting, but at one spot it was still there. 3 months later, there was basically no other plant in there anymore because it was completely taking over. If you get your hands on the ADA version, because you want to create a specific look, then this could be interesting maybe. I'm gonna put this in the sand now, and it might not be visible yet, but I'm just hoping that it somehow decides to grow over here and maybe look like it's crawling down the branch. I think we could also try to attach it into a gap or something. It should really try to find its own way, because exactly what we were discussing, the Tripartita, this is also the mini, what we were discussing is that it looks nice when there's just this little crack somewhere. So maybe it would be good to just introduce it at some points, and then it can hopefully grow from there. But since that was growing in a tank already, I'm pretty sure this is going to work kind of well. This might be closed later, but I can also imagine like this growing out here. I use a bit more. I hope that there is only like single branches growing out. I think that's a good amount, but way more than we need actually. So let's see, if it floats, you can just find a spot where you can potentially put it in later. I think there was a Japanese video and I used YouTube translation to find out what he was talking about. And basically he said that mostly when the ferns are getting the darker spots on the tips, it's because they are dirty at the bottom. So it's very important with a turkey baster, for example, to from time to time really blast out all the dirt. And it's also very beneficial for the ferns to have a decent amount of flow in the tank. It's really difficult to keep it in shape. I would also suggest, like for trimming, to only like always keep 4 or 5 leaves here, so it shouldn't grow over. I would also suggest to you, like when you buy Microsorum or also Barbitus, depending on what kind of plant you buy, but if it's, for example, in a shop but it's underwater, then you can leave it like that, maybe just cut off the not so beautiful branches. So you will buy it here, and depending on if it's underwater or if it's immersed, I would definitely recommend to cut everything down, because then it grows much nicer back in. And maybe we can just prepare a bit of Monte Carlo and Cooper. I should still check what we can do here, but maybe Ricardia. We had some Ricardia, coral moss. I think this could already grow in nicely. Also, I realized that you now have an aquascaping butler in the gallery, and you can also put like tweezers while you're maintaining the tank, so it has a lot of benefits to have a scape like this. And now for me it's already starting to be difficult where to, I mean there's obviously the places that I want to cover, but I already feel like it's difficult to tell if there needs to be more on this or that spot. Once you glued something in place, it is really difficult to remove it without like leaving stains, especially underwater, because the glue is white and then you can't really remove anything later on. So maybe it's also good to sometimes wait a bit before you plant everything, and maybe buy 1 pot less moss, because then you can still lower the water level later and put some moss in later. But it's something that I want to try in the future, because I really realized that it's happening way too often to me that I fill too much. I think also with the IAPLC scape from this year, I just overplanted a bit. Like I wasn't really able to fix that. I could have removed everything, but then I would have had to put some more rocks on it, and then it would even destroy the composition somehow. So yeah, I decided to leave it as it was, because with all the big stones it's also not possible to use a fishing line or moss cotton or something. But I would just plant some Monte Carlo somewhere in between, so it can grow out of in between the rocks. Maybe just here and there a little bit, and maybe not to the side, but maybe here in this gap a little bit. Then we just use the Cuba a bit higher up. And maybe we could also on like 2 or 3 pots. Yeah, but then we have to be very careful, I think. My idea was maybe to just put it somewhere here and just like 2 or 3 spots. I thought about adding an additional branch here in the beginning, right? I was talking about that. But since you will not see a lot of the stem plants from the background, I decided to leave it open so you can see at least some of it. I think it would be good for the tank to have that space. So for the stones, I think, because I don't want it to be a weeping look, I think I do the Ricardia. Just a very short time, it needs the first trimming, and I always miss the time to trim the Ricardia. I feel like my Ricardia's always getting a bit too bushy somehow. I like the moss a lot, but every time I'm using it, I feel like I'm not handling it perfectly. Because if you don't cut it in the beginning, then it really quickly gets to a point where it just looks way too round, in my opinion. When you cut it early, it's also leaning more towards growing vertically down. But I have to say, I have a 60p running at the moment. I'm trying to make that like a little leaning towards a contest tank. And I just have this running for a month now, and I cut the moss 2 times already. So I'm confident that this time it might get a bit better.
How often do you trim the moss?
Yeah, as I just said, not often, not enough, I think. For my 120p, which is completely covered in moss, actually, it's just moss, and I was talking about the Liliaopsis before. It's basically just moss and Liliaopsis in the tanks. This year's IAPLC contest is basically not the typical contest tank, but it's say ode to the nature aquarium from the old days, because I realized this is still my hobby and I want to enjoy my hobby, and then I decided to use lots of moss. So since it's depending so much on the tank, and since it's depending so much on the the algae, and it's depending so much on how old is the tank and like what use RO water or no RO water. You clean your filter regularly. It is really good if you siphon the soil from time to time, and if you dose a lot of iron, then it's important to clean out your filter very often, like on a very regular basis. I would say once a month. Just once a month, take the filter out of the cabinet and like completely let everything out, and then just fill it again. You don't need to have to like clean all the sponges all the time, especially when you have red algae. That's the first thing that I try to do more often. Now we have a lot of plants left. Should I use it? Maybe there is another free tank in the gallery.
I can tear one down when I get home. Keep the filter running.
And that's the dedication we were talking about earlier. Yeah. One of my biggest problems is that I start very much in the front of an aquarium and don't let enough space. And I'm very happy about the fact that this time there's lots of space in the front where the fish can like swim around. Yeah, the maintenance shouldn't be too hard in the front, I hope. I really think that the only thing that we cover, I already did that when the most of you were not here, but we already covered a bit with this piece.
Yeah.
And I think it would also be enough to cover this, and then maybe it's hanging over a bit here. So there will be like my finger is now, and then we could put some moss on top. So we just find one more little piece. Oh, but I think I'm gonna go to the side a bit. I don't know if like you can see it a bit. So who could help gluing this? Because I really can't. I have to keep my finger where it is. Can I have some waiting music, please? You want to glue your ears? No. What are you doing? Can you reach it? This is the best picture. I were at a workshop today. This is all that we got the whole day. Where would I go? I mean, you think it's holding? It's okay. I did the treatment of the algae. So basically, you use H2O2. You turn off the filter. You take 3% H2O2. Then you take 0.6 milliliter per liter. But before you do that, you take half of the water out. The water that is left in the tank, you calculate with that. So you take 0.6, I said, right? It's on the website. So basically, you can find it on Marian's website. You should get some aquarium water first out, and then mix the H2O2 with the aquarium water. Turn the filter off, then you pour it over everywhere, not directly on the plants. Try to spread it evenly, and then you leave the filter out, but still try to have some flow in the tank. So I had my stream pump in there, and then when I took it out, I wanted to clean it, and I had it was really bad because it was the first time it's magnetic, and basically it got stuck here. Oh. I had not enough power in one hand to tear it apart because I needed something to like turn again. So I was waiting for 20 minutes until our neighbors finally arrived, standing there like, please remove it. I think that was way worse than what we just experienced here. Yeah. So, final call for the moss that we're going to put on there.
How is the flow going to be in this?
I would do the outflow here and the inflow as well, like inflow in the back, because then everything can be collected directly here, and then you have it here. So the Chihiros is to go here. Another cool thing that I saw from Josh, he's just using cotton ropes and creating branches out of it. So it's also on his YouTube channel. That was something that I also was like, wait, what? That's so cool. We can still do some tweaks later in the evening or tomorrow. That's about it for today. I really hope that you enjoyed, that you had fun, that you learned something new. And yeah, thank you so much again for coming. It was a pleasure to meet you all. And yeah, I hope you will join the next workshops here as well.
Yes.